Hello, my name is Gary, and I was raised in the Western United States, so I'm a native English speaker. I hope that you will enjoy this YouTube channel. Thank you for joining us.
The Tale of Jolly Robin by Arthur Scott Bailey, 1877 to 1949. Chapter 1, Nestlings. There was a time, of course, when Jolly Robin was just a nestling himself. He lived in a cosy nest in one of Farmer Green's apple trees with his two brothers and one sister. Like him, they were all speckled with black markings. Their home was skillfully made from grass and leaves, with an interior plastered with mud and lined with soft, fine grass that their mother had picked with great care. But Jolly didn't care much about the craftsmanship of his first home. What mattered to most to him was food. From sunrise to sunset, he was constantly chirping for something to eat. And since his siblings were just as hungry, their parents were kept busy all day finding enough food for their 4 demanding chicks. That's when Jolly developed a taste for angleworms. Although he ate his share of bugs, insects, and wild berries, angleworms were always his favourites. Jolly and his siblings could always tell when their parents returned with food. As soon as one of them landed on the branch where the nest was perched, the nest would dip slightly under the added weight. That's when the young robins would start squawking loudly, craning their necks and opening their orange-tinted beaks as wide as they could. When the treat was especially big, Mr. and Mrs. Robin would sometimes chirp, "Cuck-cuck," which meant open wide, but they rarely needed to say it. Jolly and his siblings were always eager. Jolly, however, had a talent for getting more food than his brothers and sister. He also learned a few clever tricks early on. For instance, if his mother was sitting on the nest when his father arrived with food and she didn't move quickly enough, Jolly would whisper to his siblings. Together they would push and tug her, almost lifting her right off the nest. Mrs. Robin didn't appreciate the mischief, but she knew it wouldn't last long. Jolly was only 11 days old when he left the nest and ventured out into the big world. The nestlings grew so quickly that they soon outgrew their cosy home. Their parents had no choice but to teach them how to leave the nest and start flying. One day, Mr. Robin decided to stop delivering food directly to the nest. Instead, he perched on a nearby branch with a plump angleworm dangling from his beak, just out of reach. The sight of the juicy worm was too tempting for Jolly to resist. He clambered out of the nest, tottering on unsteady legs, and waddled over to his father. Without hesitation, he snatched the worm from his dad's beak. From that moment on, Jolly never returned to the nest. The next day, Mrs. Robin used the same trick to coach his siblings out. While it might seem harmless to send the young birds away, it was actually the best thing for them. After all, they needed to learn how to fly, and that was something they could never master while staying in the nest. Chapter 2, Learning to Fly. After Jolly Robin had gulped down the fat angleworm his father had coached him with to leave the nest, he clung to the branch, feeling unsure. With no food in sight, he had plenty of time to look around and feel uneasy. It wasn't long before he got a big scare. He tumbled out of the apple tree, squawking and flapping his wings all the way to the ground. Luckily, his mother was nearby. She rushed to Jolly and told him not to be afraid. "Nothing will hurt you," she said, "as long as you stay still. But if you make noise like that, the cat will find you." It may sound odd, but Jolly was even more frightened by his mother's words. They scared him so much that he stopped making any noise at all. That's how he learned never to make a sound when on the ground near a house where a cat might live. "Now," said Jolly's mother once he was quiet, "I'll teach you a new game. Watch me." She spread her wings, flapped them, and sprang into the air. Soon, Jolly was trying to copy her, and before long, he was gliding a short distance, skimming just above the ground. But, despite his best efforts, he couldn't quite manage to stay in the air. Although his mother showed him how to fly up to a treetop, Jolly Robin just couldn't seem to get it right. Finally, Mr. Robin said to his wife, "I'll teach him the rest. You've made a good start, but he needs to learn more, and fast. We never know when the cat might come into the orchard to hunt field mice, and you know what could happen next." His wife shuddered, but Mr. Robin reassured her. "I'll have him flying as well as anyone in no time," he promised. He hopped around on the ground with Jolly for a while, showing him how to find worms beneath the orchard's grassy carpet. Then, in a loud voice, Mr. Robin suddenly cried, the cat, and flew into a nearby old tree. Jolly had never seen Farmer Green's cat, but he had heard she was a fierce, dreadful creature. When his father shouted her name, Jolly was so startled that he forgot he hadn't quite mastered flying. Before he knew it, he was following his father up into the old apple tree and perched on a low branch. That was how he learned to fly. After that, he never had any trouble with it. As soon as he had realised that he'd actually flown from the ground to a branch, he was so excited that he began laughing joyfully. As for the cat, she wasn't in the orchard at all. You see, he had played a little trick on his son. Up until that point, Jolly Robin didn't have a name. He wasn't even 2 weeks old, and with 3 other young ones of the same age, his parents hadn't got around to naming them all. But when his big youngster laughed so heartily, his father named him Jolly, right then and there, and from that moment on, he was always called Jolly. Chapter 3. The Wide, Wide World. After Jolly Robin learned to fly, his father took him to the woods, where they spent each night at a shared roost filled with other young robins. These robins, like Jolly, had been brought there by their fathers. Jolly gained a lot from being around so many new friends. Before long, he could find plenty of food for himself without needing anyone's help. He also discovered the value of teamwork. For instance, if Jasper Jay became too much of a bully, a group of robins could band together and chase him away. Always help others was a rule all the young robins had to live by. Another important one was follow your father's lead. Later that fall, in October, the entire Robin family, cousins, uncles, aunts, siblings and more, prepared for their long journey to their winter homes in the south. That was when Jolly realised just how important those lessons were. If he hadn't followed his father, he might have gotten lost, since it was his first trip outside Pleasant Valley and he knew nothing about travelling. As the days grew shorter, Jolly eagerly anticipated the journey. His elders often discussed the upcoming trip, and while he waited for departure day, he discovered many delicious new foods. He roamed around snacking on wild grapes, mulberries, elderberries, and even the occasional large green katydid. There was always some new treat to try, but as the weather turned colder, Jolly began to understand why Pleasant Valley wouldn't be a great place to stay during the winter. Despite the chill, Jolly continued to find enough food to thrive. One evening, after he stumbled upon a mountain ash tree covered with bright red berries, his father remarked that Jolly seemed taller than he had been that morning. "You must have eaten a lot of those berries," said Mr. Robin. "I've noticed something," Jolly replied. "The black spots on my waistcoat are disappearing, and it's getting redder. I think the berries must be colouring it." Mr. Robin chuckled. "I've never heard of berries doing that," he said, examining Jolly's waistcoat curiously. "But it does look brighter." In truth, Jolly was simply maturing, though neither he nor his father made the connection. Since Jolly had learned to follow his father's example, he decided his waistcoat should be just as red as his father's. Determined, he visited the mountain ash every day, happily feasting on its bright red fruit. The berries didn't harm him, and he thoroughly enjoyed eating them. By the next spring, when Jolly returned to Pleasant Valley after wintering in the south, his waistcoat was the brightest red in the entire neighbourhood. Chapter 4. What Jolly Did Best. Jolly Robin had something on his mind. For several days he had been mulling over a certain question, but no matter how much he thought about it, he just couldn't find the answer. Finally, he decided to ask someone for help. That's why one day Jolly stopped Jimmy Rabbit near the garden. "I need your advice," he said to Jimmy. "Of course," Jimmy replied, hopping onto his wheelbarrow and putting on a thoughtful expression. "If it's about gardening," he added, "I'd definitely suggest planting cabbages." But Jolly Robin shook his head. "I'm not thinking about gardening," he explained. "Actually, my problem is that I don't know what to do with myself. I'd like to find some steady work. Since you've tried so many things like running a tooth-pulling parlour, a barber shop and even a shoe store, I thought you might have some ideas for me." Jimmy Rabbit stayed quiet for a moment, nodding thoughtfully. "Let me think," he finally said. "What's the thing you're best at?" Jolly Robin didn't hesitate. "I think I'm best at flying," he said, feeling cheerful because he was sure Jimmy Rabbit would have a great suggestion. He even started laughing and hummed a bit of a tune he'd picked up that morning. Jimmy Rabbit, however, shook his head. "You're mistaken," he said. "Sure, you're a decent flyer, but there are others who are better. No, what you're truly great at is laughing. Nobody laughs as well as you do. If I were you, I'd make my laughing my business." The idea struck Jolly Robin as so funny that he burst into even more laughter. Jimmy Rabbit nodded, looking pleased with himself. When Jolly finally stopped laughing, he asked, "But how could anyone make a business out of laughing? That doesn't make sense." "It's simple," Jimmy explained. "There are people who find it really hard to laugh. They'd probably be happy to pay someone to do it for them." "Like who?" Jolly Robin asked. Jimmy didn't miss a beat. "Old Mr. Crow," he said. "You know how serious he always is. It's painful to hear him try to laugh at a joke. I bet he'd love this idea. You should talk to him before someone else does." Jolly Robin looked confused. "Who else would come up with something like this?" he asked. "No one but me," Jimmy admitted with a grin. "But honestly, I like the idea so much that I almost wish I hadn't shared it. If you don't hurry up and make your deal with Mr. Crow, I might take the idea myself. So my advice is don't waste time." Jolly Robin thanked him and flew off immediately to find Mr. Crow. Naturally, he headed to the cornfield first. Chapter 5. Laughing for Mr. Crow. Sure enough, old Mr. Crow was in the cornfield, though he was feeling a bit cranky that morning, thanks to a raccoon disturbing his rest the night before. He still listened to what Jolly Robin had to say. "I've got a question for you," Jolly began. "I'm thinking of starting a business, the laughing business, and I wonder if you'd like to hire me to do your laughing for you." That idea tickled Mr. Crow. He forgot all about his lack of sleep, and his eyes twinkled merrily. He even tried to laugh, but the result was a rough, hoarse cackle, a sound so unpleasant that it was, as Jimmy Rabbit once said, downright painful. Realizing how odd he sounded, Mr. Crow quickly turned his laugh into a cough, and pretended he had a piece of corn stuck in his throat. "What are your rates?" he asked. "Do you charge by the day or by the laugh?" "Whichever you prefer," Jolly replied cheerfully. "Well," Mr. Crow said thoughtfully, "I'll need to think about it. If I pay you by the day, you might not laugh at all. But if I pay by the laugh, you might laugh non-stop, and that could get expensive. I'm not sure I'd like that." "I've got an idea," Jolly offered. "I'll work for you for free for one day. That day we can see how it goes." Mr. Crow found the idea appealing. "Deal," he said with a nod. "In that case, let's hear a laugh now, because I'm feeling quite pleased." Jolly Robin laughed heartily, and Mr. Crow admitted it was a decent laugh, though not as quite as loud as he'd prefer. "I'll do better next time," Jolly promised. "Good," said Mr. Crow. "Now that I've finished breakfast, let's head over to the woods and see what's happening this morning." When they arrived, the first person they saw was Peter Mink, fishing for trout in Broad Brook. Spotting him, Mr. Crow called out, "How many of Farmer Green's fish have you eaten this morning?" Peter Mink, just crawling out of the water with a fish in his mouth, dropped the trout onto a rock and shot back, "How much of Farmer Green's corn did you steal for your breakfast?" Jolly Robin burst out laughing at the exchange, but Mr. Crow quickly silenced him. "Don't laugh," the old bird squawked. "There's nothing funny about this as far as I can tell." Jolly stifled his laughter, realizing Mr. Crow was upset. "You'll need to be careful," Mr. Crow warned. "Laughing at the wrong time isn't going to work." "I'll try my best," Jolly promised, though he was beginning to realize that Mr. Crow might be a tough client to place. Chapter 6. Tickling a Nose. Old Mr. Crow didn't want to linger near the brook to chat with Peter Mink. Calling for Jolly Robin to follow, he flapped off to the edge of the woods and perched in a tree overlooking the pasture. "Here comes Tommy Fox," Mr. Crow exclaimed. "We should have some fun with him. When it's time for you to laugh, make sure it's loud." "I'll remember," Jolly promised. Just for practice, he chirped so merrily that Tommy Fox perked up his ears and bounded toward the tree where the two birds were sitting. "Good morning," Mr. Crow called to Tommy. "Is that a hen's feather stuck behind your ear?" he asked, looking very serious. "No," Tommy replied smugly. "It's a crow's, and I had a wonderful breakfast." Jolly Robin hesitated. Was that supposed to be funny? Then Tommy winked at him, so Jolly assumed it must be a joke. He burst out chirping as loudly as he could. "For pity's sake, stop," Mr. Crow snapped. "But you told me to laugh louder," Jolly reminded him. "Yes," said Mr. Crow, "but only when there's something worth laughing at. Didn't Tommy Fox just make a joke?" Jolly asked. A very poor one, Mr. Crow grumbled. Terrible, really. I see you don't have much experience laughing for others. Here's the thing, you should only laugh at my jokes. Got it? Jolly nodded, and Mr. Crow seemed satisfied. Good, now let's head over to the swamp where Uncle Sammy Coon lives. We'll have some fun there. They flew to the swamp and found Uncle Sammy Coon sunbathing at the top of a tall hemlock tree. How's it going? Mr. Crow called out. Uncle Sammy didn't respond. We're in luck, Mr. Crow chuckled. Looks like he's asleep. Watch me pull a prank. Mr. Crow landed on a branch near Uncle Sammy and began tickling his nose. A sneeze erupted from Uncle Sammy, but he didn't wake, so Mr. Crow tickled him again. Amused, Mr. Crow glanced at Jolly to see if he was watching. At that moment, Uncle Sammy sprang into action. Grabbing Mr. Crow by the tail, he startled the old bird, who squawked, "Help, help." After a brief struggle, Mr. Crow broke free, but left a tail feather behind. He retreated to another tree, squawking indignantly. Jolly Robin, thinking this must finally be the right time to laugh, chirped so loudly he nearly fell off his perch. Quiet, Mr. Crow snapped. This is no time for laughter. But you said you'd play a joke on Uncle Sammy, Jolly reminded him. Yes, but it's no joke to lose a tail feather, and your laughter is all wrong. You should be laughing sadly. In fact, a few tears wouldn't hurt. I feel terrible about this accident. Jolly shook his head. I can't laugh sadly no matter how hard I try, and I certainly can't cry over your tail feather. Then leave, Mr. Crow shouted. I might, Jolly replied, but then again, I might not. He stayed right there, laughing so hard that Mr. Crow gave up and flew away. After that, it took a long time before he could stand hearing anyone laugh. He always worried people were laughing at him for losing a feather, and maybe, just maybe, that's exactly what Jolly found so amusing. Chapter 7. A New Way to Travel. It was time for Jolly Robin to begin his long journey south. The weather had turned cold, with some days offering no sun at all. Even when it was clear, the sun rose late and set early. Exactly the kind of weather Jolly disliked. You'll be leaving us soon, I suppose, Jasper Jay remarked one day when he bumped into Jolly in Farmer Green's woods, where the beech trees grew. I'm planning to leave tomorrow, Jolly replied with a short laugh. Just thinking about the warm, sunny south made him feel excited. Well, well, Jasper exclaimed, I'm glad I ran into you because I know of a new way to travel. Intrigued, Jolly asked, a new way? Tell me all about it. Oh, it's much better than the old way, Jasper assured him. If I weren't planning to stay here for the winter, thanks to the excellent beechnut crop, I'd take this route myself. Please, tell me how it works, Jolly urged. Jasper gave him a sly look. Wait, are you planning to travel with a big group? Of course, Jolly replied. All the robins are leaving tomorrow, and I was planning to go with them. Jasper shook his head. Take my advice, don't do that. It's quieter to travel alone. Plus, it's much more fashionable. Jolly laughed. I'm not exactly the fashionable type. Well, maybe you should be, Jasper said with a grin. The new way is not only more stylish, but also easier. But if you're too nervous to try something different, I won't push you. I'm not afraid, Jolly exclaimed. Just tell me what to do, and I'll try it. Excellent, Jasper said. Meet me here the day after tomorrow, and I'll get you started. I can't explain now. I need to meet my cousin, Mr. Crow, in the woods. With that, Jasper flew off, calling out a loud goodbye as he went. Jolly hurried back to the orchard to tell his wife about his decision. She wasn't hard to find, but convincing her was another matter. He raised one objection after another, insisted it would be lonely and dangerous to travel in a small group. Besides, she didn't care about being fashionable. In the end, Jolly gave up. Fine, do as you like, he said. But I'm meeting Jasper Jay as I promised. I'll reach the south before you, even if I leave a day later. It's supposed to be easier, after all. Still, Jolly couldn't hide his disappointment. He spent the rest of the day joking and laughing more than usual, a sure sign to his wife that he wasn't feeling quite as cheerful as he seemed. That was Jolly Robin's way. The worse he felt, the happier he acted. And, all things considered, it wasn't a bad approach. Chapter 8. Jolly is Left Behind. All of Jolly Robin's friends and family were surprised when they saw him saying goodbye to his wife and children on the day the Robin family left Pleasant Valley for their winter home in the south. What's going on, they asked. Aren't you coming with us? Jolly Robin laughed and replied cheerfully. Not today, but don't worry, you'll find me waiting for you at the end of your journey. His wife, however, shook her head. It's one of his strange ideas. His and Jasper Jay's, she explained. Now, Jolly said, brushing it off. He playfully tilted her chin up and winked at his friends. There was no time for more discussion, as everyone was eager to get going. The travellers called out their goodbyes to Jolly, and he waved farewell in return. Before long, he was the only Robin left in Pleasant Valley. A sudden wave of loneliness washed over him, and he felt tempted to follow the others. But he knew what Jasper Jay would say if he did, that Jolly Robin was too scared to try something new. Of course, Jolly didn't want anyone thinking that about him, so he put on a brave face and whistled the happiest tune he could come up with. Only his wife, perhaps, might have guessed that he wasn't as cheerful as he seemed. That night was especially lonely. The roost, usually filled with the lively chatter of the Robin family, was eerily quiet. Despite his best efforts, Jolly couldn't keep a hint of sadness out of his good-night song. But by morning his spirits lifted. He greeted the dawn with a cheerful carol full of hope and joy. After all, today was the day Jasper Jay would show him the new way to travel south. Soon he too would be flying towards the warm sun. No wonder he sang cheerily cheer up, so brightly. After breakfast, Jolly headed to the beech trees to find Jasper Jay. Jasper was there, finishing his own breakfast, but he claimed he was too busy to help just yet. Meet me in the orchard this afternoon, Jasper said. When the sun's above the mountain, I'll get you started on your journey then. And so Jolly had to wait through the long day while Jasper busied himself with silly antics like mocking Farmer Green's cat, teasing a sleepy owl, and filling the woods with his loud, raspy calls. Jasper was late to their meeting in the orchard too, showing up just as the sun was setting. But Jolly was so relieved to see him that he didn't even think about being upset. Let's go, said the mischievous blue-feathered bird. Follow me and I'll teach you this new way south. And if it's not a good one, may I never eat another beech nut again. Jolly laughed, confident there was no need to worry.